Now we're going to animate the antenna and talk a little bit more about the graph editor and the timeline. So I'm going to select one of the antenna. In this case, I've got the left antenna selected, and I've already placed the pivot where I want it to articulate. If I look at my vertices, I want to rotate this on the X axis, like so. So I'll start at the beginning of my timeline, frame 1, and I'm going to right-click on Rotate X and choose Key Selected. I'll move to frame 24. At 24, I'll move it just up a bit. Then I will move to 48 and make it 0 once again to return to the point at which I began. So now I've got a cycle for the antenna, and just like the wings, I would like it to cycle throughout the duration of my animation. So with the antenna selected, I'll go to the graph editor. In the graph editor, I'm going to select Rotate X, Marquee Select, keyframes, go to Curves, Post Infinity, Cycle. And now it's going to move continually. Now let's take a look at the timeline. And I don't want the antenna and the wings to be on the same rhythmic cycle. I'd like the antenna to go up and down a little less frequently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the Shift key and make a very general selection across the keyframes in my timeline. And the only thing I want to be aware of is that the keyframes are now appearing as yellow lines. What this means is that I can do a couple of different things. If I wanted to, I could click on these two opposing yellow triangles and move the whole animation to a different point in time, in which case, if I was to, you'll notice the antenna don't move until I cross over the first keyframe. I'm going to shift and drag through them again. What I can also do is by dragging on the first key, the last triangle or the first triangle over here, I can drag that out and it separates out equidistant those key frames, making this cycle much slower, and as a result it would cycle less frequently. So if I was to go ahead and play that now with my button, you can see it's going a little bit slower than the wing is. Now let's go and animate the other antenna, because I want to show you how you can copy and paste. It all works fine if you can remember the numbers or the degrees of rotation. But if you're doing something a little bit more fluid, perhaps you're not aware of precise numbers. So there's a workaround for that. So let's select the other antenna, make sure we're back at the beginning of our timeline. And once again, I'd like to rotate down the x-axis. So I'm going to right-click on Rotate X-axis in the channels, choose Key Selected. There's my red box next to the X in the channel window, corresponding red line in my timeline. And now I'm going to go to 24. And at 24, I'll just go ahead and move that up a bit. And now I'm going to move to 48. Now, I could punch in 0 again, but let's say for argument's sake I don't know what that number is. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, drag through keyframe number 1, right-click, and then choose Copy. Now if I return to 48, right-click, and choose Paste, and paste, I have an identical keyframe. Now I need to cycle that so that it goes for duration. So I'll click on the graph editor, choose rotate X, marquee select the keyframes, and now I'm going to go to curves, post infinity, cycle. And all I need to do is kind of stretch this out and make this time frame a little slower. So I'm going to select the keyframe in which we adjusted the distance between these, and you'll notice that the second one now is at frame 80. Now, just to be precise, if I was to wind back to the beginning of my movie and take a look at some of these tools in the lower right-hand corner with our VCR control, these two triangles with the vertical line allow us to rewind to the beginning. The corresponding icon for the end of the movie is over here. The next icon in on the left and right is to move back or forward one frame at a time. Inside of those, you'll notice that there's the triangle, but there's also an orange line. The orange line represents keyframes of a selected object. So if I were to click with my geometry selected on the forward keyframe triangle, it navigates to roughly frame 40 and then roughly to 80. Now I'm going to go to the second animation. I'll shift and drag through, drag on the little yellow triangle, and drag it out to roughly 80. And now they're pretty much running at the same speed. So if we were to take a look, we've got our wings and our antennae animating on a continual loop. Now if I wanted to, I can select an element, and in the timeline, I can shift and drag through a single keyframe and move it. I can right-click and choose delete. All right, so everything is done in the user interface initially when you're learning animation through the timeline, and the Shift key will give you access to your keyframes and the functions that are associated with them.